Welcome to Drinks with a VC, where we explore the humanity behind investments. Grab your favorite drink and join us as we laugh, learn, and liquor up with some of our favorite venture capitalists.
Whether you're a startup founder, fellow VC, LP, or just curious about the investor ecosystem, you've found the right podcast. Please like and subscribe.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Drinks with a VC. Thanks for joining us via whichever platform you're using to view or listen in. I'm Vik Laquara, co-founder and general partner of seed fund Green Cow Venture Capital. And as always, I'm joined by my friend and co-hostess with the mostest, Bree Hansen, who leads business development at Ravix, a wonderful firm that provides outsourced accounting, fractional CFO, advisory, and orderly wind down, and HR consulting headquartered right here in Silicon Valley. If you are a startup in need of those services or a VC looking to make sure your startup is in good hands, give Bree a shout. Today's episode is also brought to you by Fidelity. Fidelity is committed to supporting startups at all stages. Using the Fidelity Private Shares platform, founders can automate equity management operations and financings in a single collaborative hub, using the automated cap table and data room to prepare for their next round of funding. To learn more about how Fidelity can help your company grow, please check on the link at the episode description down below.
We love Fidelity and Jason, so thanks so much, guys. We really appreciate it. We did get a lot of flack from our friends, family, and listeners, all three of them, around episodes 23 through 29, because we were featuring all male venture capitalists.
Yes, we got lots of flack.
So I wanted to say that the lack of gender diversity on this show was not lost on us, and it was more of a scheduling issue than anything else. As proof, now for the third episode in a row, we are rectifying that with yet another incredibly talented, thoughtful, and successful female venture capitalist that I am incredibly excited about. Do you want to jump into the intro, Vik?
Today's guest has had a meteoric rise from her first job of mucking stalls at a horse barn in her rural hometown of Monroe, Maine, to making the Forbes 2023 Brink List of emerging venture capitalists to watch. After graduating with a degree in government from Connecticut College, where she also co-founded TEDx Connecticut College and was a varsity rower, she took a job as a technology investment banker at JP Morgan, where she focused on biotech and financial services. She then spent 3 years at growth equity firm Summit Venture Partners, where her investments included Podium and InfoArmor. The latter was actually acquired by Allstate for more than $500 million. She then moved to the other side of the table, building her operational chops at Zora, where she was chief of staff and ran North American sales strategy and operations. In 2019, she joined Costanoa Ventures and has played a pivotal role in the firm's expansion into fintech and emerging markets, specifically LATAM and Africa. 2 years later, she was named partner. She sits on the board of 8 portfolio companies, including Tencent, Asus, Truly, Canada, Malga, Highline, Highnote, and Kavala, and is an advocate for adding diverse perspective to not only boards, but the broader venture capital community via her work with organizations like Allrace. Her passions extend to raising awareness around mental health issues, and she's a regular volunteer as a crisis counselor for Crisis Text Line. Please welcome partner at Costanoa Ventures and the pride of John Baptist Memorial High School, Amy Cheetham. Amy, Yay. Welcome.
Thanks for having me. It's awesome to be here. Thanks for that very humbling intro.
Cheers. Thanks for being on the show.
Cheers.
Well, Amy, we are so glad to have you today. What are you drinking with us?
This is a Chardonnay that is delicious. Thank you so much.
Our pleasure. We want to start with a VC unboxing, which we don't normally do, but we have something to go with your little spread there. So go ahead and open box 1. There you go. Go ahead.
Oh boy. Never done this on camera before. Okay.
So we know you're a big fan of Italian food, and we got you some nice dipping oils to go with the bread.
Ooh.
and the little
Oh,
jam and just to nosh on while you're drinking your wine because it is a
oh
Friday.
wow. This is amazing. Thank you guys. If I can get these out of here, hopefully.
So you're a big Italian food fan.
Yes, absolutely.
What are your favorite dishes?
Uh, Pesto is probably my number one. My
Okay.
parents have a huge garden, and so always grow fresh basil in the summer and grew up getting spoiled with fresh pesto in the summer. And so that is my like all-time favorite. The main
Yeah.
issue is that I can't really, usually at restaurants, unless it's actually in Italy, it's not that good because my
Yeah.
parents was so amazing. So it's sort
Mhm.
of like
Mm,
my parents' pesto or nothing at all type thing, but it's amazing.
yeah. Do they
That's
still live in Monroe, Maine?
They do. They're still in the house that I grew up in.
oh, that's so
That's
Yeah.
cool.
incredible. That's incredible. And look, I don't know if you know the more recent numbers, but we were doing some research. Monroe, Maine, as of the 2020 census, has 931 people. Does that sound about
That's a lot of
right?
growth. That sounds bigger. People must be having kids. I don't know what's going on. I think when I was there, maybe six or 700 people. So I guess we've had some big newcomers. There's a lot of population growth going on there, percentage wise.
There you go. There you go. Is what was it like growing up in such a small town? And we mentioned you were mucking. I don't even know what that means. Can someone, you need to explain to us what this first job was that you had.
At a horse barn. So when horses poop in their stalls, someone has to clean it out. And
Yeah.
so usually the lowliest employee at the horse barn gets tasked with that lovely piece of work. And so it's usually how you ingratiate yourself with the rest of the barn staff. And so I spent, I don't know, I was probably 12 or 13 when I started doing that. And part of it was to pay for horseback riding lessons
Fair.
where if you would, you're a working student. So if you went and helped around the barn, then somebody at the barn would teach you lessons, maybe not for free, but for a discounted rate. And so that was the main trade-off.
Yeah. That sounds like a rite of passage that I wouldn't be down with, but it's also funny. It's actually even more interesting that you equate that to your almost as bad as your job at JP Morgan as an investment bank. I don't know what's more telling about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's probably pretty similar, honestly. Look, it's every job you have to earn your stripes. And I remember my first few months when I just had started at JP Morgan, especially as an intern, right? My first
Yeah.
role was the summer of 2011 as an intern.
Yeah.
And of course, you go get coffee for the whole desk. That's just part of the game, but they pay for yours. Or you go
That's
get
right.
lunch, but they pay for yours. So I was
Yeah.
always, hey, this feels like a fair trade-off. Like I get free lunch. Yes, I do have to go get it for you, but I still get free lunch. So it's worth it for me. It's the same as mucking stalls. It's a
Yeah.
fair trade-off.
I want to take this a little bit deeper now. What piqued your curiosity growing up? And was there any exposure to the world of tech and finance and venture at that point?
No exposure to the world of finance and tech, which
Yeah.
is funny to look back on. But my parents are incredibly intelligent, very curious people.
Mm.
And I have an older brother as well, and he's 4.5 years older. And every dinner table conversation was about something that, especially when I was younger, I just couldn't understand, right? They'd be talking about, I don't know, you name it, right? My dad is an entomologist for the study of bugs. My mom is a botanist. They're very heavy into sciences and like physical
Wow.
sciences.
Okay. Yeah.
And so and dinner was mandatory, right? Every night you had to be home, you had to sit at the kitchen table and eat. There was no technology. It was sit there. Obviously, it was early 2000s, but
Yeah.
you had
Yeah.
to sit there and be present for dinner. And even if it wasn't long, I feel like those conversations were actually a huge part of what sparked curiosity. And my parents are the type of people where my dad will get curious about, right now, it's about aliens. My dad will
Okay. All
get
right.
curious. He's going to kill me for saying that on the podcast. My dad will be curious about something and he will go read every book there is to read. He will listen to every podcast. He
Yeah.
will research. He will talk to people. He'll tell people why he's interested in it. And my mom is the same way, where if she wants to learn something, she's just going to go learn it. And there's no hesitation. There's no embarrassment. There's no fear. It's just, oh, this is a cool thing. I'm going to go
Yeah.
learn it. And
Yeah.
so I think that was the beginning of it for me, was that every time there was something, it was always, oh, go learn about it, go figure it out. What is it? And my parents, it was mostly science and politics
Yeah.
and a little bit philosophy with my dad. And then he branched beyond that. But ironically, there was really no business conversation, which is funny to reflect back on, but it was
Yeah.
everything else but that, effectively.
You and I share a love of Dax Shepard. And you just, so you reminded me of, now I feel a little bit like Dax Shepard in this moment, because I want to talk about myself and my family, but I'm not going to. I'm not gonna run into that. But I bring that up because I felt like I had every opportunity. My dad could have talked about startups that he was building, but didn't. And in fact, the conversations around the dinner table were always around like the PBS show that we just watched on something that was science related, whether it was like physics or something more biological related, whatever it might have been. And so I felt that was always like a big factor in contributing to my curiosity, but then also it was a forcing function to learn on my own. And I'm curious to know if you really contribute, or you attribute your curiosity and like the drive that you have to learn things on your own to the upbringing more, or to schooling and going off to Connecticut College, or what do you contribute that to mostly?
I think upbringing for sure.
Yeah.
And by the way, just to go on Dax for 1 second, because
Yeah.
I can't resist.
Yeah.
I think he is the best interviewer I've ever
Mm-hmm.
listened to. And I was reflecting weirdly earlier this week to someone, because we were talking about how, like, storytelling, right? And the power. I
Yeah.
was talking to a founder about
Mm-hmm.
this. And I think what's so special about Dax is that he's so curious. And that's why I'm obsessed
Yes.
with him. That's why
Yes.
I idolize him, because he has this ability. He learns so quickly about so many things. And he has
Yeah.
this, he's very humble. He never pretends to know a ton about a subject, but he
Yeah.
knows enough that he can ask the right questions.
Yeah.
And I actually really equate it to venture, because that's exactly what being
Yes.
sort of a generalist investor is. Like,
That's
you have
right.
to learn enough that you can connect the dots and understand and be able to say, oh, this is a different category, but it actually reminds me of this other thing that I learned about XYZ. And like, those dot connector people, I
Yeah.
think, are the people that are really successful in life. But I
Yeah.
also think in venture. But I would say, back to your actual question, like, it totally came from my upbringing, because I went to public schools in Maine that were not particularly great. And I had the privilege of going to John Babs, as you mentioned, which was a bit of quasi charter school in Maine. They're
Yeah.
called town academies, but it's the same idea.
Mm-hmm.
And thankfully I did that, because I think there, I was in a town where, like, you got made fun of for doing your homework in elementary school. And that was
Oh,
really
wow.
hard, but especially coming from my family where my parents both have PhDs. They're very smart. They work really hard. They're very curious. And it was really hard the first 8 or 9 years of school, maybe not.
Yeah.
Yeah, about that, until up until high school, effectively. And so much of that was that I was curious. And I remember doing a project in middle school on, I think it was on worms or something. And all the other kids were like, why are you so interested in science? Like, why do you think this is cool? And I remember my parents being so sad, because they were like, this is what we're trying to create. We want you to be interested in this stuff. We're so
Sure.
proud that our daughter wanted to research some bug instead of, I don't know, whatever else it might have been. But it was definitely hard to maintain that up until high school. And I think high school and college were different,
Yeah.
but early on, it was super challenging.
Yeah.
Your parents sound really cool. How did they meet and what brought them to Monroe?
My parents are awesome. They're such funny humans. Whenever my friends meet them or we go on a walk, my mom's talking about every plant and my dad's talking about every rock and every bug. And you feel like you're on this, like, hilarious nature walk with my parents. Like, you can't walk more than 5 feet before they're like, wait, there's this cool bird we need to look at, which is such a cool experience, but also hilarious. They met actually in college. They also went to Connecticut College, and they met
Aha.
where I
Okay.
went, and they met there. I was actually born in Pennsylvania, and they were working at a small college in South Central Pennsylvania. And I think just realized that the community that they were looking for didn't exist in that area. And
Yeah.
so moved up to rural Maine to have more land and start a garden and raise kids. I was 4 or 5 at the time. My brother was almost 10. So I think it felt like a good time to make that transition.
Yeah.
Cool. So they're like early homesteaders of this new trend.
They are self-proclaimed back to the landers, I think. Mom and dad, I hope that's appropriate, but I think they will appreciate that.
They'll
So-
appreciate it. Of course they will. Of course they
I
will.
admittedly spent some time in Google Maps checking out Monroe. And
Mm.
so for our listeners who can't see the YouTube video, I've got Swan Lake, which is not in Monroe, but near Monroe behind me, just to give the vibe of where you grew up. This
Yeah.
gorgeous kind of rural, what we would think of when you think of Maine, ponds and lakes and farms, like organic farms everywhere. In a way, kind of Anne of Green Gables idyllic, but then wouldn't expect you to end up in Venture.
Yeah.
I
The
am more
foliage too.
Yeah,
by
the
way.
foliage.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's gotta have the
everyone
foliage.
like goes to Maine to take photography. I'm going to Maine in the fall for my photography trip. So you had these cool dinners with your family. Your mom's a botanist, your dad's into insects. What were you guys talking about at the dinner table? What were the common conversations?
I wish I could teleport back to those moments. There was a lot of political talk. And a lot of that, I think, as you can imagine, like growing up in the early 2000s, there was a lot of political turmoil going on. And that, I think, was what sparked my interest in government, which is what I ended up majoring in.
Yeah.
And some of that, I think, was you happen to have a good teacher and that teacher is in that subject. And then you're like, oh, this is actually really fun and interesting. And I want to learn about this. So I do think there's probably some credit due to some of my high school teachers. But I do think a lot of it came from my parents and debating these things at the dinner table. And I always wanted to feel like I could participate in those debates. But when you're the youngest of two, you're
Right.
always several years behind. And so it's hard to keep up. And I always felt like I was trying to have something to contribute or enough to say in those conversations before my brother was out of the house.
Did you have a very opinionated brother as well?
Yes, I think I think he would own that. I think he would own
Okay.
that. My brother and I are very close,
Yeah.
and we're really good friends at this stage. But totally, he has a strong personality, as do I, and I think we both have strong opinions loosely held. Though he might have strong opinions strongly held, if I were to
Fair.
say that.
Fair enough. What I'm alluding to, by the way, is your Twitter. It's fantastic. It's good reading, honestly. And we dove into it to do our research before we had you on. But for all of the listeners and the viewers out there, you've got to check out Amy's Twitter. It's at AMYCHETHAM, at Amy Cheetham. And you're very opinionated. There's some light moments, there's some heavier moments. There's definitely a lot of promotion of your founders and the people that you work closely with, and that's always a good thing. But it's definitely something that we're going to be referring to throughout this conversation. We haven't even hit the tip of the iceberg right now. So
I will
we're
just
on it.
preemptively say, however, that I think you have to be really opinionated on Twitter.
Yeah.
Otherwise,
Yeah.
it doesn't work. So, in defense of myself, I will say that I might
Fair
be
enough.
slightly less opinionated in real life than I am
Yeah.
on Twitter.
Yeah.
So, do you know your personality type, Enneagram or Myers-Briggs? Have you ever done a test?
I want to say I was a 3, but I actually can't remember off the top of my head.
A 3 could be right. 3s are typically very opinionated, so that works. 3s and 8s.
3s and 8s. Am I a 7? I feel like I keep asking this in every episode.
7. I'm a 7.
Okay.
So sometimes when we go online, we show a different side of ourselves. We'll show like a shadow side, or we'll have more confidence. Do you feel like when you're on Twitter, you're 100% you, or do you feel like there's a bit of a persona that you're putting on in order to be on Twitter and be heard?
I think everybody does that to some extent.
Yeah.
And I totally think that I do. And what's interesting about Twitter is that I put a lot of time and effort into it during the pandemic, but I've really slowed down because I just haven't found the engagement to be as meaningful or necessary. I was also doing it right as I was right prior to getting promoted to partner, trying to win deals. It felt like having some sort of presence was really helpful. And now I've just found it slightly less meaningful or critical, I think.
Yeah.
But yeah, for sure. I think you have to create some sort of persona that gets engagement. And I think that's either strong opinions or poking fun, or
Hmm.
it has to fall into one of those two categories to drive engagement. I like to think that useful content is also helpful, but I think sometimes that can be challenging.
No, I think it's great content. I really do. I think you're shedding light on a lot of things, and we'll get into the themes around women in venture. We'll get into the themes around mental health. We'll get into themes really around kind of your investments in LATAM and beyond, and the great people that you work with. I want to go back to what makes you tick and maybe draw a comparison, maybe not. We'll see. I moved when I was younger from middle school to high school, and I lost a good section of friends that I was very close with. And I felt like in high school, I was maybe a little bit of a shell of myself where I wasn't as outgoing as I was. When I finally got to Vassar, I let it all out. Like I was very outgoing. You seem to be someone that craves human interaction. And again, lending to you being also naturally curious, that interaction is something that's growing. Did you go from high school where you were ridiculed for being someone who wanted to get the great grades and learn the best, and then go into Connecticut College where you're like, boom, I'm going to get out there and open up again and just really find that social aspect of yourself?
It's interesting because I don't know if I would say that college was actually where I felt the most myself. I actually really think it's been post college,
Okay.
which is interesting, right? Like, I
Yeah.
think college was a really good experience, but I found myself occasionally in a group of friends that still wasn't super supportive of me working really hard.
Mm,
And I don't just mean at grades, right? I was really deeply committed to finding a job that would allow me to not go back to rural Maine during the summer.
yeah.
That was my singular mission. Was I arrived on campus at the beginning of freshman year and I'm like, great, what job is going to pay me enough that I don't have to go home for the summer? And my parents do fine, but they don't do well enough that they could afford to spend any money, any extra money than what they were already paying for me to go to college. Over
Sure.
the summer, you're on your own. You got to figure out. It's either you come home or you find a way to pay your rent. And so from basically day one of freshman year was like, figure out a way. If you don't want to be in Monroe, Maine, figure out a different path. And I had this admittedly probably like level of obsession, right, with figuring out what that path was going to be. And I think there were other people around me that were like, Amy, why don't you just want to go to a party? Like, why can't you just let loose and have fun? Like, why can't you act like a normal, quote unquote, normal freshman or sophomore in college? And that's hard, right? I think that was a challenging moment. And the irony now is that I think I've built an incredible group of friends and
Yeah.
incredible community, both in San Francisco, but also all over the US, and have a bunch of friends in New York and beyond. And a lot of that has come from finding people that have similar drive and similar willingness to go after the things they want. And I honestly, I think just struggled to find that early on. And
Yeah.
I thought it meant that there was something wrong with me, which is really tough, right? And that's why
Yeah.
and now I know now that was not the issue, right? It just meant I hadn't found my people. But I
Sure.
can relate to what you're saying of switching schools and that being a part of the challenge, because I think it's really hard to find, it's very hard to not look inward and
Yeah.
assume that you're the problem when that's challenging.
There's a superpower that you have that you share with a lot of past guests, right? Which is around being able to connect with people from a lot of different backgrounds. And that's something that doesn't necessarily happen after until you're able to be in a really comfortable place yourself and explore other people's backgrounds from that lens and from a lens of just knowing who you are too, right? And it sounds like that part of you really developed after college and I know we're going to jump into this a little bit and maybe we'll jump into it now. And is there part of that you found in traveling throughout Latin and South America? What was the part that kind of developed that muscle for you?
It's probably a little bit of everything, because the thing that immediately comes to mind around being able to connect with people is actually feeling really different Like when
Yeah.
I went to Connecticut college, I grew up in this tiny town in Maine. My parents were not super well off. I was not wearing the designer brands that everybody else at, you went to Vassar, you understand, at
Yeah,
a small liberal
absolutely.
arts college is wearing. Everyone shows up like head to toe, Tory Burch or something on your first day, and you feel really like an outsider. And I think that, and probably high school too, I
Yeah,
really learned how to be friends with a really diverse group of people. Even though I joked a little bit about the struggles with friends in college, I had a very diverse group of friends. I probably had like 10 or 15 different groups that I was like, oh, I would get invited to their parties, and I jumped around between groups. And I actually think a lot of that was because when you feel different, you work really hard to try to fit in and to try to find
Mm-hmm.
points of connection. And so you're
mhm,
overreaching and working extra hard to try to fit in. I think that builds connection.
yeah,
I, of course, it ends up taking a lot of like energy and effort, and probably stems, unfortunately, from an insecurity at the beginning of all of it. But I do
sure.
think there's a huge, massive benefit, which is that I think you learn how to be pretty disarming, and you learn how to use humor, whatever else you need to do to make friends quickly and feel like you can drive that connection. I do think that the travel made a difference in that too. I backpacked around South America for 6 months, originally by myself, ended up meeting a bunch of people that I spent time with, but that was really scary.
Yeah,
And I think made me realize it's that there's a lot of other people that want to connect and want to make friends too in those moments, and that other people are feeling similarly. And I think it taught me how to build small community, right? But be shameless about figuring out how to make friends in those environments.
yeah, yeah.
So I think we should do a VC unboxing here and start getting into some of the stuff we want to dig into. Let's go ahead and open the box labeled Carpe Diem.
And as a segue, there are parts of Monroe, Maine you might have tried to avoid, but I think your exposure to the outdoors and hiking and skiing, biking, basically anything under the sun has extended to California, right?
Oh, this is awesome. This is amazing. Yeah, I love national parks, and that's a huge part of why I live in California is for outdoor access.
Fantastic. We know you love to travel, that you've traveled the world, and you did your 6 months in Latin America. I want to know all about it. I just got back from Peru. I was in Peru in October, did the Inca Trail, and really fell in love with South America and definitely want to go back. Now it's all I can think about. I want to hear all about your travels. Why did you go, and how did you pick your itinerary?
I honestly went because a guy that was, I think, 2 years older than me in college had gone when he first graduated. It was the first thing he did for his 6 months. And he was an extended friend group and didn't know him all that well, but he had just raved about it. I think Instagram had just come out as well. And so I'd seen a bunch of his pictures, and it just seemed amazing. And I think truthfully, I was in that period of, I had the job lined up at JP Morgan. I could graduate early from college, and it just felt like the stars were aligning. And I was sick of college. I think I felt just like, man, I've worked really hard. I feel like I've outgrown this a little bit, and I want to move on. But I know if I technically actually graduate early, JP Morgan's going to call me and be like, can you start early? Instead of just, so instead I was like, okay, I'm going to take personal leave for the first semester of my senior year and basically take from kind of end of July when I finished my internship at JP Morgan, or maybe early August, through January off to go travel, which is what I ended up doing. And the itinerary was, there's a well trafficked like backpacker route that most people take to stay at hostels. And so I started in Ecuador and did some volunteering there. And
Oh
then
wow.
from there went through Peru, Bolivia, Chile, and Argentina. And it was amazing.
Wow.
That's
So
that's brilliant.
what was your favorite country or place and why?
As you can imagine, I guess asked this a lot. And it's a hard one because I think Bolivia, I think, is the most underrated country.
Mm.
I don't know, maybe Paraguay is more underrated, but in Latin America, and Bolivia is amazing. And the topography, the landscapes, the people are so wonderful and so nice. And I think it gets a bad rap for being dangerous. And I just thought it was an amazing place. The people were so kind. The salt flats are incredible. All of the kind of topography in between. If you can basically take a 4-wheel drive vehicle from Bolivia to northern Chile, and it's just unbelievable. And there's no people. It's very sparsely populated, and just one of the coolest different landscapes from anything I'd ever experienced before, which I think made it feel even cooler because it felt so different than anything I'd ever seen.
Did you go to Lake Titicaca?
I did. Yes, the 13-year-old boy in me thought that was a hilarious place to go visit. So yes, I definitely went there.
I had to bring it up.
You can't not. Yeah.
It is in Bolivia.
It is in Bolivia. It's beautiful. It's really beautiful. And there's an island in the middle of it that you can take a boat out to go visit. And I think, if you'll entertain me, I think the most scared I've ever been in my life was on the way home from this island. You take these boats that are just operated by locals, and I don't know, they're like $3 or $4 to get on this boat, and it's really cheap. But the night before, they had this huge festival on the island, and everyone had gotten really drunk the night before. It was like it was a sort of like indigenous peoples on this island. It was their harvest festival. So it was really cool. But we go to take the boat back, and they were like, "Sorry, we don't have any drivers. Everyone's hungover. Like, we don't know what to tell you." And so we go get on this boat, and so they packed like probably 100 people onto a Boston whaler. I'm kidding a little bit, but it was a tiny boat. And the whole time I just remember sitting there watching the water washing over the edges and being like, I think we're going to sink the boat and this is not going to go well.
This is how I go out.
There's people holding, people are like holding chickens. There's like people with like, just like complete chaos. It's like,
were you alone during this whole trip? Were you traveling by yourself?
I was traveling by myself, but you meet, it's hard to explain to people that I think haven't done sort of the hostel circuit, but you end up seeing a lot of the same people. And so it feels far less lonely than I think you would imagine, almost to the point where sometimes you have to not stay at the popular hostel because you want to not to just be on your own for a couple of days. So there's the community that gets built amongst these backpacking hostels is pretty special.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Did you, so speaking of LATAM, right, you really led the charge for Costanoa in Latin America, specifically Mexico, Brazil. How much of these experiences traveling around LATAM spurred you to look at the LATAM market, and how much of it was just the curiosity that happened once you got to Costanoa?
Probably mostly the curiosity at Costanoa, in all honesty. Not that the backpacking experience didn't influence it, but when I joined Costanoa in 2019, this was right when a lot of capital, especially in the financial services industry, was starting to flow, particularly into Brazil, but also into Mexico. And Nubank was looking like it was going to be a phenomenal business, Creditas and others. And it became really clear to us that if you're going to be a fintech investor, you have to think more globally. Otherwise, you're going to miss some of the biggest trends. And there were so many opportunities in countries that have really positive regulatory environments. Brazil is the poster child of this, that there's just so much more innovation to be done there. And so we felt like, hey, fintech in the US is honestly, I think at that time in 2020 or 2021, a little bit overvalued, a little bit overfunded. Let's go see if there's interesting opportunities in Latin America.
How good's your Spanish?
It's decent. It's not perfect, but enough that I have a couple of founders that live in Mexico City, and when I go down to visit them, I can get around. It's not perfect, but it's not terrible either.
Nice.
How much do you love as a foodie and someone that loves cooking? Maybe you're not as good as it to your own liking, but as someone who is a foodie, when you go to Mexico City, how happy are you when you get down there and eat?
The food's so good. And I think it's such a cultural experience on the food side too, where people really value food. And I am a person that like lives to eat, not the other way around. And I think I have plenty of friends that are like, oh, food is fuel. And I'm like, how could you live like that? I just can't. I cannot relate to that at all. And so I think I appreciate Latin America and Mexico, I think in particular, because they care. There's just so much care and emotion like put into the food, which is a really cool experience.
And it's not just like the high-end food. It's down to the very most simple, basic street tacos to the Michelin star restaurants. there's a real passion for the attention to detail and the simplicity that goes into making the food. So I think it's just like
Oh yeah.
I don't know. I'm with you on that, and I'm salivating. I was in Mexico City for my cousin. Shout out to Aisha and Akbar. They had an amazing wedding in Mexico City, and I just couldn't imagine that. That was the one thing that I don't think fully sunk in until I was there, was how modern and forward Mexico City was as a spot. And I wish I had known that so many more years ago.
Yeah. Well, and they've done such a good job too, I think, trying to cultivate the tech ecosystem.
Yeah.
Brazil, Sao Paulo in particular, has done the same, where
Yeah.
people really want to build companies. And I think the level of sort of scrappiness and intensity that some of the founders in the region have is incredible. And they have this sort of chip on their shoulders of it having been really hard to build a business there. There hasn't been access to capital, all of these things that I think we take a little bit for granted in the US. And as you guys can imagine, I have a soft spot for people with chips on their shoulders that have maybe come from less privileged backgrounds. And there's a lot of that in Latin America. And so I think I have a soft spot for people that have that underdog mentality and want to work really hard.
Yeah, yeah. Actually, I'm going to reference a tweet of yours right now to that effect.
Oh boy.
You said a lot of people seem to have forgotten that the goal of a startup isn't to preserve runway or raise another round. The goal is to build a product customers want to pay for. Is that part of the attraction to emerging markets like this? Is that the purity of entrepreneurship still exists?
Yes and no. I think this tweet applies everywhere. And yeah, that wisdom still holds true today. I think it's one of the hardest things to learn, especially as a first time founder, though, because you raise this money and you're, of course, naturally fearful of spending it. Some people are not fearful, and that's a whole other can of worms. But as we've seen a lot of recently. But what's really hard is that I think it's really easy to forget what the actual goal is, right? The goal is to build a really nice business. And occasionally you're making a decision between, hey, do we do something risky that might put our runway in a tricky position, or do we not take that risk and preserve runway? And both are of course scary, but I really struggle with this idea of, oh, but it's fine because we have 50 months of runway, we'll figure it out. And I'm like, that trepidation and that fear, it really kills companies, because I think lack of urgency is the biggest issue that I see. And it applies to everything, right? It's decision making, hiring, getting your product in market, like picking an invest, like you name it, right? Like that urgency, I think, is the most important thing. And yeah, look, I think there's lots of people that could go raise money and tell a really good story and do nothing with it. It's a whole different story to go build a sustainable business on the back of that.
Yeah.
So that makes me think about a question off the back of that. So if you're talking to a founder in Latin America and they're like, how would you define product market fit to that founder, and B, tell them how to go get product market fit? Because it sounds like it's really what you're focusing on.
I think this applies to all founders, by the way, regardless of geography. I would say, and look, we invest pre-product market fit, seed company in inception through Series A, but product market fit to me looks like your customers are ripping your product out of your hands. Like you are shipping product that you know isn't perfect yet, and people are still saying, we want to pay you for this. Like cannot. They would be extremely sad if your product stopped working. And I work with a business that we'll announce in the next couple of weeks here that we just led their Series A, and it's in the legal tech space. And that's been that experience, right? Like their customers are ripping their products out of their hand, and we keep raising the price and they keep saying, we don't care. Like we need this. This is driving revenue for us. This is really important. And I think it's the really annoying answer of you know it when you see it, which I really hate, but I do think there's this reality.
You had a great leading indicator. If you raise the price and they still pay for it in this economy, that is product market fit. I think that's a great way to describe it.
Yeah. And I think the other thing too is this concept of if it's not perfect and they still want it, that's the other indicator. And to me, I think so many founders are rightfully so really nervous about getting product out in market because they think that if it's not perfect, people won't like it.
Yeah.
But I think it's actually the opposite. Elad Gil said something at a talk I was at a couple weeks ago that I thought was really fascinating, which was if you go and do customer references on a company and they're bad, but the customers are still paying for it, that's a good company. And I had never, it's so counterintuitive, but I really thought about it and I was like, that's a really good point. Because how many times have you gone and
So
done
good.
references and the customers are playing, they're still paying for it, they're still using it, they haven't churned. And
Sure.
look, of course, that doesn't apply in all cases, but it really made me think about, yeah, if they're paying for something that's less than perfect, the problem is real. And maybe it's not that product that's the right solution, but you've at least validated that the problem is super real. I don't know, it struck me as a funny comment, but I think it's accurate.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. I love that. That's a really good point too. Great stuff.
Yeah, earlier you said the word fear. And it's interesting because I think you have one of maybe a quote from you, or I'm going to bastardize this entirely, but it's something about around facing your fears and just being comfortable with your fears is much more than just not doing something because you're fearful of doing it. And it strikes me just as someone who sits on 8 company boards, which by the way, sounds exhausting to me. And I love working with founders, and that still seems exhausting to me. But can you talk a little bit about having, and in the context of fundraising, even right now, having those conversations around fundraising in an environment that we have currently where there's fear around showcasing or not being able to showcase product market fit moving forward?
Maybe I'll start by addressing what you said earlier around fear. And
Yeah.
I think a lot about it and doing things when you're scared anyways. And one of my best friends, ironically, someone I grew up with in Maine, lives in San Francisco now. And she's one of my closest friends, and she's a really good mountain biker. And she and I always talk about this concept of, people will ask her all the time, aren't you scared? She's, yeah, I'm scared. I just do it anyways. And that has been my approach to everything in life, is like, courage and bravery doesn't mean that you aren't scared. It means you're actually probably terrified. You just do it anyways.
Yes.
And I've been thinking a lot about that concept of not the absence of fear. It actually probably means you have more, but you're just willing to overcome it. And I think that probably applies to every founder, maybe not every founder, but most founders have fear around some part of the job or another, but they find a way to persevere and do it anyways. I think the same thing applies to fundraising. And for better or for worse, confidence and storytelling matters so much. And I joke with, I work with all the time, that they should go do 15 push-ups before they go into a pitch meeting, or they should run around the block, or whatever they need to do to pump themselves up and feel like, I can walk into this meeting and be ultra confident and talk about why I'm the best thing since sliced bread and why what I'm building is amazing. And that stuff really matters. But I think it's really hard, especially for people that maybe grew up in an environment where they were a small fish in a big pond, or whatever it was that gave them some sort of complex that I think all of us have. It's really hard to do that. And so I spend a lot of time talking to my founders about, how do you portray humility without short selling or shortchanging yourself? And that's a very tough balance to strike, because you want to be humble, but I think you have to find ways to talk a lot about the success that you've built at your business.
I actually want to go deeper in that on a tweet you wrote, but let's save that for after she opens the next unboxing.
Okay.
Because it goes with the first gift. So the next box is, let's see here, Glad I'm Here. Sticker.
Okay, I see it. Wow, this is so awesome. So many.
Your
presents.
labeling, by the way. Bree's labeling has gotten stronger.
Wait, let me see that one.
Your
Hang
label
on.
game.
Okay, there, that goes with another gift. Was it
Not this
stuck?
one?
No, it does.
Wait,
They
hold
go
on.
together. There's two that go together. And I just realized you're opening that one. Maybe should go second.
Okay, wait. There's one that says be present. There's different roads often lead to beautiful destinations.
Oh, that, I think that's it. I think
That's
it's the
the one.
different roads. Yeah,
That's
lead
the
to
one.
different. Okay, those two go together. Yeah.
I like that moniker. That's a great label.
I know. I was trying to pick ones that went with the gifts from a sticker book I had. Crafty some.
Man, I haven't gotten this many presents in a long time. This is awesome. Ooh.
We aim to
Wait, what is
please
it?
here.
You may have to open the box. So
Okay, yeah, hold on. I gotta.
you'll open the box. These are very popular these days, and I've noticed you're drinking out of one. It's called a
Oh,
Oh,
mug.
wait, is it an emotional support water bottle? These are my favorite.
Oh,
This is
I've never heard of
incredible.
an emotional support water bottle. No, but I
we
think
should
as a
definitely
three, you're gonna this
dive into
one.
that.
This
Yeah,
one
yeah, absolutely.
is
Absolutely.
emotional support water bottle.
I can't get it open, but yes, I will get it
Oh
open
my
after we
gosh,
talk. Thank you.
this is taking, it's like triple package. Okay, so I have this joke where I say that I think we all need to start dating Edward Scissorhands in order to open our Amazon packages now because it's so difficult to open.
True.
Okay,
True.
Oh,
so
this is sweet. Thank you so much.
so we got her a hiking mug with all the national parks and stickers to go on there so you can mark off the ones you've been to. So
Ooh.
as you go to them, you can put the sticker on and then it will be a like living story of everywhere you've traveled to those national parks. And then the book goes with it. And then you can open the second gift that goes with that.
This one.
Yes, the little
Okay.
tiny
Wow.
one.
Bree,
Oh, this is
that is cooler than you
amazing.
described it. Yeah, that is way cooler than you described it, Bree.
Oh, when I described it to you and I told you
Yeah. Yeah.
the gifts.
Oh,
Yeah.
these are really cool. Oh my gosh. Oh my God. You guys are
But
amazing. This is
but
so
talk
cool.
about storytelling, right? Like this
Yeah,
is your
it's so she
yeah.
can tell her story. And so
Yeah.
then what the second gift is international stickers. So you can do the same thing on something else. But I wanted to get you the international ones because you've traveled so much and you're working with LATAM and Africa. And I wanted you to be able to also perhaps on another item showcase or put them on there. I don't care. But yes, I
This is
wanted
awesome.
to show off
Wow.
how cool all of your travels are and the adventures you've had. And that kind of goes on to our next topic, goes back to the tweet, which is
Yes.
you as a woman have said that you've had problems figuring out what is that right balance. Do you want to read the tweet, Vic? Because I know you pulled it.
Ooh, yeah,
can pull
sure.
it.
I like this one. I hate how much time I, like many women, spend thinking about confidence and how to portray just the right amount to avoid being labeled as aggressive, domineering, or meek. And then I think you go on and in this thread, a new Harvard business study is the first time I've seen someone mention confidence being weaponized. Those are the tweets you were talking about, right?
Yes, that's exactly
Okay,
what I was
okay.
talking about because
Yeah.
she's trying to solve that problem for founders, but she's also trying to solve that problem for herself.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a really hard one. Funny, I forgot I tweeted that because it feels like that was a lifetime ago. I think it was probably only a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
It's a really hard thing to find the right balance and find the right middle ground because venture is such a weird business. Half the time you actually don't know. Like the number of times in a week that I get asked something I actually don't know the answer to, but I have the confidence that I can go figure it out and that the founder or whoever it is, and I will like work through it. But
Yeah.
it's a weird job because
Mm.
maybe this isn't true because I haven't done many other careers for a long time in my life, but imagine that in many other jobs, you master it and learn like some degree of, hey, I probably know the answer to most questions. In venture, I don't know. I think you constantly, and that's one of the cool joys about it, but it can be really hard to feel constantly like you don't totally know what you're doing.
Yeah.
And I think the beauty of having enough confidence to be able to admit that is that people trust and believe you more rather than you just having blind confidence. The double-edged sword of that is that you have to have enough confidence in the way that you're handling yourself that people trust you. And that is a fine line. And I think especially as a woman, I found it hard in the boardroom to know when and how to give feedback. Perhaps my fatal flaw is that I'm a very direct person and I don't pull punches. If I think something, I'm probably just going to tell you. And that has been hard to figure out how to manage effectively. And I think now it works in my favor more than anything else. But in particular, earlier in my career, it was hard because I think some people saw it as aggressive or disrespectful, when in reality, it's just this like commitment I have to trying to find the truth and trying to find the right answer. And it usually doesn't have anything to do with my own aggression or anything related to that. And it usually doesn't even have that much to do with the other person, right? It's just trying to figure out the right answer. But I think that can be, in particular from women, misinterpreted pretty frequently.
Yeah.
It sounds like you came from a home where everyone was really open and honest and shared their opinions and no one was really punished. And so I think leaving that kind of bubble, which shouldn't be a bubble, it's shocking when it's like, oh wait, everywhere's not like my home, where everyone has the right to say their opinion.
Yeah.
Oh, for sure. And I think that's really in every industry, every firm, every dynamic has a different hierarchy, and trying to figure out whether it's appropriate to make a comment about something, especially early in your career, I think is just so challenging.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
so, yeah, you're constantly trying to recalibrate in every room that you're in and figure out what the most appropriate way to say something is. And so that's, I think, a constant challenge. And then in particular for women, I think it just adds another layer.
Yeah.
Who are some leaders or women that you think got it right or are getting it right that you admire?
Yeah. I wish I had a longer list, honestly.
I know, right? I'm looking to you for this.
Which is sad. I would say the woman in the venture industry that I haven't had a ton of exposure to, but that I've heard incredible things about that I aspire to be like, is Layla Sturdy at Capital G.
Okay.
And I think everybody, one, she's now running that firm inside of Google, but she's an incredible investor and seems to have really figured out how to, especially in the growth world, which I think is even less diverse than the early stage venture world where I spend my time. But she commands respect, but I think she still is like maintains some of the softer sides of being a woman in a really positive way. And so I certainly look at people like her and aspire to be like that one day.
Yeah. You had a lot of success at Summit Partners, and then you decided to go the operational route, as we mentioned, and you were at Zora for a bit before joining Costanoa. And you've mentioned to us off camera how pivotal a role Greg Sands played as a mentor to you and someone that you look up to. How did you approach Costanoa, or Costanoa approach you, where you felt like that was a place that you could really flourish and that you wanted to bring your talents to?
John Cowgill on our team, who's been with the firm for a long time now, and I met way back when I was at Summit, maybe in 2016 or so,
Okay.
way before I was leaving Summit. And so he was an associate at Costanoa at the time. I was an associate at Summit, and we became friends. And we had chatted a little bit before I made the jump to Zora. And then I took that job, and for various reasons, 12 or 18 months later, John resurfaced and came back and said, "Hey, we're thinking about hiring. What are your career plans and thoughts?" And I think that helped that there was some continuity over time of
Sure.
having looked up to that team. And I had met Mark Belko, another one of the partners on our team, previously too. And my theory on the decision-making process as I was leaving Zora was you have two options. You can go to a large multi-stage firm that has a big platform, a lot of resources, but you're probably going to be a cog in the wheel. I had been an investor for 3 years at that point. I knew I would come in kind of mid-level and really have to fight to move up, fight for responsibility, learn a lot, I'm sure, but that was one option. And of course, you get the brand and everything that goes with that. Then on the other side, your other option is pick an up and coming firm and be a part of building something. And as I assessed the opportunities that were on the table, Costanoa just felt special. And Greg Sands, I joke about this all the time, but I think he's the nicest man in venture capital. And he has really strong morals. He's an incredible investor, and I think has built such a good culture at Costanoa and sort of see the longevity of so much of the team there. And so I saw that and felt like this was a time in my career where when I could take, again, it's not really a risk, right? It's not nearly as risky as joining an early stage startup, but there's still some risk. The firm was only 6 years old at the time or 7 years old at the time and only investing out of their third fund. And so there was some real risk around what's the trajectory of the firm going to look like. And felt like I would get rewarded for some of the firm building that would need to happen when I joined. And that felt like the right, I'd say that plus knowing that there needed to be more boutique B2B software funds that focused on seed and A out in the world that had concentrated positions, worked closely with founders. Those were the things that kind of convinced me. And I had already done the big firm thing and knew I wanted to try something a little bit different.
Yeah. Did you think that you were going to be on 8 boards when you joined Costanoa?
Maybe. I don't know if I even thought about it. It's interesting, right? Because you look back and you're like, I don't know. And it's funny. I think the amazing part about this job is getting to work with such smart people. And so I feel, yeah, it's a lot of work, but I feel so privileged to get to work with such a cool group of founders that are amazing and chose to work with us at Costanoa and are all smart. And it's a hard job, obviously, and some of them drive me crazy on various days, as they're well aware of. But
Yes.
it's been such a privilege to get to work with this many founders.
Yeah. I think it's probably a testament to the value that you provide the founders and why they want you to be on the board. But there's also this other element of you probably, in most cases, being the only female on the board at these companies. What is that? And how do you, I know you're a big champion of board diversity and having multiple perspectives, different perspectives and backgrounds on boards. How do you advocate for that? And then what has been your learnings as to how to push that forward and not be the only woman on a board of a company?
Yeah, sadly, I think there's only one of those boards where there's multiple, well, there's another woman other than myself.
Yeah.
And that doesn't include on the operating side, but
Yeah,
the
sure.
venture side.
Yeah.
Which is sad. And I think I remind myself every day that like part of why I do this job is for driving some diversity forward. And
Sure.
sometimes that means that I have to be the diversity, and that's just a part of the job. And it is what it is. And I know that I'm bringing a different perspective to the room. I constantly talk about if you don't measure it, it doesn't matter to my companies. And so we talk a lot about measuring diversity at the board level inside these companies too, and being thoughtful around it. And that feels like a tangible thing that I can do. And I do think too, there are things that women are better at. And I do think that there are moments where really hard conversations are being thought through and you're trying to script through how to deal with this thing. And I think sometimes women can have a different perspective there that's really meaningful that doesn't come out in a more homogenous board. And so I try to remember that too, that for better or for worse, sometimes my role is to say, hey guys, I think there's a different approach here, and let's be thoughtful about it. But it can absolutely be hard. And I think we all hope and wish for a more equitable split in boardrooms across the globe. And I hope I get to be a small part of that.
Yeah. Do you feel like you might be less discerning and just take more board seats because you need to push that envelope in the future, or do you feel like that doesn't really influence kind of your thinking on that front?
I hope not. I think the best thing I can do for other women in venture is be the best investor I can possibly be.
Yeah.
And there's nothing more frustrating than feeling like the reason that you got the board seat or something is because you're a woman. I don't think anybody wants to feel like they got that. It's a tricky one, but no,
Yeah.
I try really hard to not have that impact it.
Yeah.
My experience with learning about diversity on boards and just in companies in general has been like diversity is always better, because even just diversity of genetics, diversity and anything brings better outcomes. What has been some of the learnings or things you've seen from having a more diverse board versus having maybe one that's
you just hear different perspectives. And I think it's so easy to think of diversity as only being like racial or gender.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
there's so much more than that, especially around
Agreed.
socioeconomics. And that I think is sometimes almost more impactful than these conversations, because you'll have someone that, I don't know, didn't go to college or came from a really different background. And a lot of times their perception of how to handle a situation can be really different. And I think that's one of the things that I bring to the table actually, is that I didn't go to Harvard Business School and I didn't come from a super privileged background. And I think a lot of times it's easy to forget that's the type of diversity that matters as well in those moments.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of a specific instance. I think the biggest place is usually around hiring. And I get really frustrated when there is this concept of like target schools or any of the things that sort of trigger my insecurities are around having grown up off the beaten path a little bit. And I love when my companies find people from non-traditional backgrounds and they end up being rock stars. I think that's one of the things I get most excited about, is when we find someone that didn't go to college or went to community college and worked really hard and found their way through this sort of murky hierarchy that is tech.
Sure.
And I love those stories probably more than almost anything else. And I think those people, one, they always bring more diversity with them because they're going to go hire people that look like themselves.
Yeah.
And so I love those stories. And when my companies do a good job finding those people, and Look, it doesn't mean that the people that come from the Ivy League schools are bad. I just think you need a mix. And
Yeah.
there's so much benefit to having a mix.
Yeah. Last question on boards before we move on to another topic. I asked a couple of folks this previously, but since you sit on, you are the really reigning champion of most boards sat on this show. I think I
That
actually
can't be true.
maybe
Charles the precursors on so many
concurrent boards sat on. I think there are folks that we've had on that have sat on more boards in aggregate, but concurrently, I think you might be the winner on that front. But
and Vic does all that. He does the investigation, as you heard in your intro.
That's true. Yes, there was a colonoscopy given here.
Exactly. So he actually can say this with authority.
It's all out of love. It's all out of love, everybody. Taking a step back, though, there are boards that are highly successful, and then there are very dysfunctional boards. I'm of the opinion that, CEO, the founders, they really dictate what kind of board you're going to have, both in the people that you choose to bring on and the way that you conduct meetings, right? What is the one trait amongst the highly successful run boards that's a common trait that you see amongst all of those?
I hate to sound so basic, but I think it's just communication. How do you structure your meetings?
Yeah.
And it's not just communication. You have to have a board that actually reads your materials.
Yeah.
And I think it is usually a self-fulfilling prophecy of, if the materials are bad, people won't read them. And so you end up in this kind of cycle of no one read it. So then we have to do an update during the call, and then it's not productive, and we don't do a strategy session, and it's this like nasty self-fulfilling prophecy.
Sure.
And I think the best founders produce high quality materials. They get them out early. They make sure people read them. They want you to ask them questions. And then they run a really tight meeting where they're very clear on, hey, this is why we're here. I'm not just going to stand here and update you for 2 hours. This is what I need from you guys, and really encourage that pushback. And I think there's this frustrating habit of a lot of VCs is that they don't read the materials, or they don't put in the work. And I remember getting advice that probably was from Greg, actually, early in my career. You just got to show up, you got to do the work. And if you do that, you're already doing better than so many of your peers. And I remember laughing and being like, it cannot be that easy. There's no world where it's that easy. But it's true. If you put in the work, you read, and you make thoughtful comments, and you ask good questions, and you support them, like, you're already doing better than so many. And that's what I tell our associates. It's what I tell peers and mentees. And it is wild to me how many boards are dysfunctional purely because people don't prepare. And I think we're doing our founders such a disservice when people do that, because they're taking time that they could be talking to customers or hiring or doing anything else to update us on their business. And yeah, we're shareholders, but at the end of the day, our job is to be helpful and propel the business forward. And so I always feel a heavy responsibility to try to make sure those meetings are as productive as possible.
Yeah. This is why I love Amy, Bree.
Advice, by the way.
Yeah, I think it's fantastic advice, but also what I'm hearing from you is that storytelling doesn't start and stop with selling your company and getting financing, but storytelling is so important through every process of running a company.
Everything. Yeah. And even, I will make a Dax Shepard plug here. I listened to a fascinating podcast with him this morning that was with this guy, James Doty, that wrote a book on the power of manifestation.
Yes.
Listened to it. It's really interesting if you haven't listened. And so much of what he was saying is like the stories we tell ourselves are almost more important than anything else. And it is fundamentally true for founders, and I think everybody, of course, but really around founders. If you're telling yourself a consistent story of how all the data from your business, from your board, from your customers, from your employees adds up, and then even your internal storytelling matters, right? And I think it's easy to forget, and it's hard, right? A lot of times I'm working with early stage companies, and they're like, "Why? I'm the only person on the board. What's the point of holding this kind of formal board meeting?" And I'm like, "No, it's because you need to take yourself seriously enough to think that it's important to do this, and you're going to learn something from doing this. You're going to learn something from distilling this information down, and creating those habits early on actually really matter." And I think it's like a confidence building thing too, right? Around, hey, if I have this really buttoned up board and I know how to work with my investors, I'm going to feel like I'm running a really tight ship. And I think that's going to make me feel better. Storytelling, I think it's so easy to think it's just around fundraising, but it's everything. It's hiring, it's fundraising, it's how you get customers on board. And if you can't do that, it's really hard to be a good founder.
Yeah. Do you think, okay, I know I said that was the last question around board meetings, but you bring up a good point around putting in the work. Are you familiar with Edward Norton Jr. by any chance? Ed Norton.
The actor?
The actor. Yes. Sorry. Excuse me.
Oh,
The
yeah.
actor, Ed Norton. I said,
Yeah.
You referred to him like he was an
Edward Norton
investor.
Jr.?
Edward Norton Jr.
Well, you might be surprised to know that he's also a serial entrepreneur. And the latest company that he has co-founded is called Zeck, Zeck. And they
We'll have to
just
tag him on
announced
this on LinkedIn.
No, look, we will. But let me tell you something. So he just raised a Series A, led by Salesforce and Costanoa Ventures. The reason why I heard about this is because he spoke at their latest kind of massive event, and Zeck is basically using AI to help founders put together board materials. And I'm bearish on it because, frankly, it kind of flies in the face of putting in the work to be and to have a more productive discourse around what you're building and how you're building it.
Yeah.
And so I'm not a fan of, and I don't prescribe, and I never have. I've been investing in AI since 2008, but I don't think I've ever prescribed to this concept of AI should take over this kind of work.
I think it's fine if it makes the pitch deck prettier or helps you hone the messaging. But
Yeah.
I think so much of the beauty of, for example, one of my companies is about to go raise their Series A.
Yeah.
We've been honing the story, we've been honing the pitch deck, everything.
Yeah.
And the amount of clarity that doing that work has brought the founder, and even just confidence. Like, I think him seeing the deck after, be like, oh, we're doing a great job, right? Like, we've done a really good job crystallizing why what we're building is going to be a big company, why we have the team assembled to build this, all of these things. And so much of that, to your point, came from going and doing that work. And I think maybe there's an argument there that we should have done that work prior to raising, right? Like that crystallization. But I think but sometimes the fundraise is the thing that forces that crystallization and makes you think about, okay, we need to really hone our messaging and lock this down. And so I agree. I think I hope we don't lose the strategic work that goes into these things. I'm fine if these decks get built with AI to some extent,
Canva,
but I think,
you know?
Yeah, exactly. But there has to be some, like, the work that benefits us is all of the strategic thinking that goes into it, and that needs to not get replaced.
I don't even see the TAM data there.
Don't want to be critical.
We're not going to tag Edward Norton Jr.
No, look, if our viewership and listenership extends to Ed and his team, look, I'm being critical out of love, just because I think it's a worthwhile conversation to have around, and it's a conversation we have around AI, generally speaking, right now. It's, look, there's, I think, and this is, by the way, why I think augmented AI is so much more important than Gen AI, because I think that's when you're really firing on all cylinders, right? That's where you're really taking advantage of everything. Okay, so fine, Edward Norton Jr., I just want to cheers to you. A blog post that you wrote, the title is "Why Every Fintech Company Will Be an AI Company." And it's on Costanoa's website. You worked with, I believe, your summer fellow, Angeline Rao, on it. Kudos to Angeline if you're listening to this. And I think everyone in the fintech space, both investors and founders, should read it. I'm sure, Amy, you've tweeted about it. If you haven't, tweet about it right now because it's fire. But in it, you outline a couple of things: cost savings and efficiency, compliance, insurance, and processing complex financial data as the frontier of where AI can really play and create real value. And we were talking earlier about building a product that customers really want. You outlined those areas, and there was a article that just came out, Thomas Tungus, I always mispronounce his name, talking about how we're on pace for $80 billion to go into AI by the end of the year. We're already at 18.3 billion, despite like a over concentration in like 4 companies, but we're
Yeah.
looking at massive investment in AI that has come along, massive adoption of AI. I think you really laid the playbook out for founders. Can you talk a little bit more about that for us and just expound on that?
I think the AI generally is interesting because I think we all think about it as, oh, we must go invest in these AI companies. But the
Yeah,
irony of this is that it's going to impact every single business. Every company I work
Mm-hmm.
with is adding, whether they're generative AI capabilities or not, but they're adding these tools. Every good engineer, every good founder is doing this. And
hmm,
I find it funny that everyone wants to go invest in AI companies, but in theory, like your whole portfolio should be making these transitions.
yeah,
Granted, it's a little bit different to be an AI native company, but fintech is interesting because I think the core use cases are pretty obvious here. And so much of them are related to document processing, fraud,
hmm,
underwriting, all these things that we called out. And
sure,
we're seeing that across large institutions and small. So many companies are trying to drive efficiencies. And some of the obvious use cases are really just, as I said, around those document processing problems of,
yeah,
hey, I'm trying to go work with a new wealth advisor, but all of my data lives in PDFs. If I'm
sure,
this wealth advisor, and his back in history, like you're scrolling through PDFs and you're looking through and trying to figure out what this person's financial picture looks like. And now you can take all that unstructured data and get it put into a nice, neat output using AI. So I think those are the places where really like the processing of unstructured data feels like the most special thing as it
yeah,
relates to like the lowest hanging
Mm-hmm.
fruit in fintech. There's obviously way more applications beyond that and way more exciting things happening. But I think the problem I see in fintech, and we're already seeing this today, is that regulators want to see explainability for
hmm,
every AI model, every LLM that's being used. Regulators want to know exactly what data is being used. Is that data legal? Was it allowed to be used? And I'm pretty excited about this class of startups that is just getting started right now that are all around how do you build explainability? How do you make sure that your engineering team is able to go back and say, hey, these are exactly the pieces of data that we used. Here's why it's
yeah,
above board, especially if regulators and this is how they work. They wait until things start to happen. They watch and wait, they watch, and then they crack down. And so if you're not being thoughtful about this the whole way throughout, even prior to them coming in, it's going to be a problem. So I'm excited
yeah,
about companies that are helping with that because I think we just don't know what we don't know as it relates to AI and financial services.
yeah.
Fascinating. Huh. So I'm curious, as a VC, how do you use AI? What
Yeah, I use ChatGPT a lot, often for very basic things where I'm trying to learn about a new industry and I will literally say, hey, create me a primer of all the things I should read about shipping and logistics if I want to understand duty drawback, or I want to understand what government policies are interesting for me to be thinking about around Brazil's regulatory environment in relation to cross-border FX. Okay, great. Like all these sort of pretty niche things where I'm just like, I don't even necessarily want you to tell me the answer. I want you to tell me the 5 articles to go read.
nice.
And then Plot is pretty good as well. So I probably use
Okay.
those two the most. And but a lot of it is really around this type of higher level research where I want to have some sort of output to quickly figure out what's the right answer to this. And
Hmm.
I never use it for things where there needs to be a high level of certainty around accuracy, but for things where I'm just doing research, I find it really quite useful, in particular around larger industries where it can really help dive in and find useful information.
Yeah. What do you tell your portfolio companies that are looking to integrate more AI into both back end and kind of consumer facing or customer facing ways around doing it successfully versus just going around in circles?
It's usually related to what are the problems you're already solving for your customers that you can do better if you
Yeah,
utilize some sort of AI, right?
sure.
And
Mm-hmm.
I think, of course, there are companies that are launching new products around this and have done so very successfully.
Yeah,
But I like the idea of start with the low hanging fruit, which is make things you're already doing and people want easier before you start moving into adjacent products. So you can do both, of course, but I think there's a lot to be said for addressing that lower hanging fruit and go talk to customers, right? What are they excited about? What are the things that they really want to see in the product? And I think a lot of times we forget that's the best source of all of this is just go talk to your customers and find out
Yeah.
what they want and
Yeah.
Yeah.
or ship something like we talked about earlier that's decent but not amazing and see what the reaction's like. And you'll learn way more from that than anything else.
So I feel like as a person who grew up in a rural area and then you've gone to South America and you've really seen firsthand all of the different classes and socioeconomic groups, where do you see AI really solving these financial problems for these groups? And what does the utopia look like for Amy in the future in terms of like solving some of these real financial problems for these groups that are underprivileged?
It's such a hard question to answer. I have one answer to your question, dodging your question, which is that one of the places I'm most excited about AI in is actually in healthcare
Yeah.
because I
Oh, we'll
think
get
that
there. I
and
can't
some
wait.
of and some of that is of course I think related to like finances, right?
Yeah.
Because so
Mm,
much of the issue with healthcare is
Yeah.
cost. And so
wow,
I think AI, yeah, could
that's a
bring costs
beautiful
down. And I think
segue.
therefore,
Yeah.
yeah, and that's my hope is part of that is it's gonna make some of these things more economically affordable for
Sure.
not just the upper middle class. On the finance side, my hope is that so many of the issues that we see around lack of financial inclusion have to do with inability to figure out how to verify identities, figure out how to prevent fraud. And the better
Mhm.
we get with those tools, the easier it's going to be to underwrite people. Like someone that has a low credit score because they missed one payment shouldn't be treated the same way as someone who has a low credit score because they stole money or have
Right.
been a fraudulent user. Like those two people shouldn't be treated the same way. But
Yeah.
because of how unsophisticated a lot of our financial services are, oftentimes they get underwritten the same way because they
Well,
both have a whatever 520 FICO score or whatever you want to call it. And obviously I'm being a little bit facetious, but I do think there's a real level of complexity and nuance that can be added into these underwriting decisions that it's going to
sure.
unlock a lot of financial inclusion.
Yeah.
And some of that's related to immigrants in the US, some of it's related just to lower classes in the US, whatever it might be. So I'm really excited about what smarter decision making processes and using more just like different and diverse data to make these decisions is going to lead to. So that's probably the number one thing I'm excited about. And then, of
Yeah.
course, lowering fraud just benefits everyone. But in particular, I think it allows for expansion of the credit box that people lend into if they know that there's lower likelihood for fraud.
Yeah.
Those are
Yeah.
such great points. I actually wanted to go back to bridging over from finance to healthcare because I think that there are two areas where I can see that are obvious where healthcare hits the finance, like they're connected. One is what you said earlier, if you've not paid your medical bills or whatever, it can hurt your credit and that shouldn't, or maybe it's that you lack of payment or lack of access. The other might be that if you're depressed or have some sort of mental health issue like anxiety, you're less likely to be able to earn income. So that puts you at a disadvantage. So I'd love to hear how you became so interested in mental health.
My own mental health struggles, honestly. And I've struggled with anxiety my whole life. It's always been something that's been a challenge. And I have so much empathy for people that struggle with any sort of mental illness. And I think in this country, really in the last 10 years, I think the
Yeah.
progress we've made towards destigmatizing it is phenomenal. Look, I do live in a bubble in San Francisco, but so many of my friends talk openly about it. So many people I work with talk openly about it. I think there's much more ability to support people that are struggling with it that
Yeah.
wasn't there 10 or 15 years ago. And so I really got interested in it because of my own struggles. And then as I become a VC, I don't think we talk about it enough with founders. Like being a founder, being a CEO, I think is one of the hardest jobs on the planet. And it's so lonely and it is so easy. You look around, you're on social media, everyone else looks like they're crushing it. You feel isolated every time there's a bump in the road on your own turf. And it is a very challenging thing to not have
Yeah.
that erode your mental health. And that's for someone that maybe didn't have any mental health struggles going in.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot more work that we could be doing as VCs. And I always joke that 20 to 30% of my job is being like a quasi therapist to my founders. And so much of that is really just sometimes they need someone they can talk to that is not going to be judgmental, is going to be able to just listen and provide advice and say, hey, I think you're doing the right thing. That's the right way to handle this. And it's hard. I get it. It's really hard. And
Yeah.
that's probably one of the most rewarding parts of my job. But yeah, I think the mental health crisis in this country is certainly not getting better given technology and everything that's going along with it. And I'd be lying if I didn't say that. I'm worried that there's a world where AI makes it worse. And I don't know how to think through that, but I'm definitely nervous for what the future holds.
Yeah, I look, that's a really intriguing conversation to be had around AI and its effect, both positive and negative, on treating mental health, right? I can absolutely see a world in which AI almost can be a catalyst for, again, lowering the barriers to getting the right treatment, getting the right help that you might need.
Yeah.
But then I can also see the converse that you alluded to, which is it almost normalizes a very apathetic environment where it almost enables us to kind of
like dehumanized.
continue to dehumanize it. And that's just so scary to me. I want to stay on this topic. The conversation around mental health has really come about a couple of times on our podcast. Most recently, we had Howie Diamond. Do you know Howie by any chance, from Pure Ventures?
I don't think so.
Early stage venture fund. And they shared a platform called Pilea, Pilea, which is open to general venture startup community to join. There's a mental health, there's a physical health, there's a number of different aspects to this, all designed around founder well-being. But to your point, a couple of numbers that they throw out there is 30% of founders suffer from depression, 27% suffer from problematic anxiety, 65% of startups fail attribute the reason for their failure to people-related problems, and 30% of failed startups cite mental health issues as the key or the reason for their failure. And those are scary numbers. And I guess just knowing someone like yourself that is, and please, I hope you don't mind me saying this, but I go to a therapist, and I think knowing
me too. I love my therapist.
Yeah, my therapist, Jason, I love you. If you ever listen to this podcast, I don't think you do, but he unlocked a lot of things for me. And obviously you and I both wish, all three of us wish that everyone could have their Jason, but subject to that still being a problem, like discoverability, finding that person, finding that help is still so problematic. I'm sorry, this is a huge wind up to the question, which is really around when you're talking with your founders and they feel like they're on an island, a very lonely island, and building. What is the one thing, or what are the many things that you tell them to help get them off that island and to get them help and to push them in the right direction?
Probably the same thing my therapist tells me, which is that almost anything you're experiencing is not unique to you. You are not alone. And I think so many times when you're in a state of feeling scared or whatever it might be, just being reminded that what you're feeling is normal is shockingly helpful. And it can be so hard to see it when you're inside of a company and something's happening that's frustrating or hard. And just, I think of myself as like a pattern matcher, partially the job of VC, of course, on the investing side, but actually on the inside, that's part of the job too, as a board member, is to say, hey, I've seen this before, and this is what happened, and this is how we got through it, and here's 5 suggestions for what you can go do. And sometimes the person's not ready for the suggestions, right? Sometimes you just have to say, hey, this happens and it's okay. But I think so much of what's hard about being a founder is that, especially if you've never done it before, you don't know what's normal. You don't know that it's normal to have turnover on your executive team. That happens in almost every company. Of course, that's going to happen. You don't know that it's normal for a co-founder breakup to happen at most startups at some point along the way. And I think there's all these things that are they feel utterly terrifying and very unique to you when they're happening. But the
Mhm.
reality of it is, so all of this stuff, it's rarely a totally new experience. And reminding people of that the same way my therapist reminds me of these things is the same thing. And I think my hope for people, and one thing that I've learned on my journey with all of this is that once you learn your triggers, it just makes life maybe not easier, but you're at least able to take a step back and have the analysis of why is this bothering me so much? Why am I
Sure.
worked up about this? And why does this feel especially terrible? And I think there's some distance that gives you. And I'll give an example of one of my founders right now, I think has just been having a hard time working through having a perfect product versus a done product. And so we've been
Yeah.
talking a lot about like, why is it so scary to put product out there? What is it about this specific thing that feels really hard and really scary? And like, how do we work through it? And by the way, I think everybody feels like that. And so how do we help him feel like, hey, this is a normal feeling and let's just work through it and figure it out together? But it's so scary if you feel like you're on an island with that stuff.
Yeah. I want to stay on mental health and I want to move away from the founder and go back to the venture capitalist. And I think you said something that struck a chord with me. We're in a constant state of fundraising for fund one, fund two, fund three, fund four. It looks like everyone and their mother is raising a fund and is having success in closing their funds and starting to deploy capital. What's the word of advice, the conversation around building your own venture fund that you have for a young emerging manager to help them guard their mental health against kind of the FOMO that's
Oh,
out there and all of these other things?
well, if somebody else figures it out, they should let me know. I
Yeah.
it's hard. The hardest thing about this job, I was just talking to somebody about this today, is it doesn't ever stop.
Yeah.
And part of the problem, and that's true for so many jobs, right? It's
Yeah.
not unique to venture, but when you feel in service to your founders, which I very much do, and I think
Mhm.
one of the few things I can do to differentiate myself is to work really hard and be there for my founders.
Yeah.
And that means that sometimes they're going to call you at 6 a.m. with bad news, or they're going to call you on a Sunday night with bad news, or maybe good news, but a lot of times it's bad news
A
when
lot of
it's over
times.
the
Yeah.
weekend.
Yeah.
And that can be really hard, and figuring out how to drop is very challenging. And the thing I am trying to muddle through at the moment is how do you draw those boundaries but still be a really supportive investor and a really supportive colleague, whatever it might be.
Yeah.
And that's hard. And I think that is especially true in this always on culture and always on world where we get, you get rewarded for being highly responsive and everybody wants you to be highly responsive. And
Yeah.
I struggle with that because I think
Yeah.
it's very hard to figure out how to turn your brain off. I guess I have two pieces of advice for up and coming VCs, regardless of emerging manager or not. One is figure out how to set boundaries and what kind of person you want to show up as. And
Yeah.
remember, and this is maybe as much for myself as it is for anybody else, but remember that the recharge makes you better at your job. Like,
Yeah.
what if turning your brain off at 10 p.m. until 7 a.m. and not looking at your phone, or 8 p.m. or whatever it might be, or going and having dinner with your kids from 5 to 7 every night? What if that makes you better at your job, not worse?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And it's very easy to think that being always on makes you better at your job, but I actually think it maybe doesn't. I think going
Yeah.
and taking the break sometimes does.
Yeah.
And then the second thing would just be find the thing that you have to offer other people and go do it. And whether that's you're a good listener, you have really good product strategy advice, you have good go to market advice, whatever it
Yeah.
is, find the thing that resonates with people that you have to offer. And it'll and go and don't just give it to potential LPs, don't just give it to founders, give it to everyone in the broadest way you can. And I'm such
Yeah.
a believer that back to our manifesting conversation, whatever you put out into the world is what you're going to get back. And
Sure.
I think that's how venture works, is if you work hard for an LP and maybe they don't invest in your fund, maybe 5 years later they will. And
Yeah.
that stuff really matters.
Yeah. Yeah.
Your advice should be for everyone, by the way, not just founders. Like, that's just good
Yeah.
life advice.
Yeah. Yeah. That's
fair.
that's solid life advice. I think, but Bree, think about it this way. Um, I think we're incredibly privileged to be venture capitalists and to have the kind of job that we have. But I don't think oftentimes people understand um, how on you have to be all the time. And Look, I'm just going to quote your Twitter again, but you use some app to track how many hours you've spent in meetings. But you spent
Oh yeah,
in,
it's
in
horrifying.
2022, you spent like 16, no, 1,100 hours in meetings. By the way, that's for whoever is judging this and however they're equating this, that's 90%. You spent more time in meetings than 90% of people in the system. And that's 49 days and a total of 1,200 meetings.
Yeah.
It's a lot of time that you were on. And Bree also knows this. I will come into conversations regarding the podcast where I'm just emotionally and physically exhausted from conversations that are highs and lows. Like it's the sine and cosine of the roller coaster ride of being a VC, where you get good news and then you get bad news. And oftentimes they're like minutes apart. I don't think people get that. And if you are suffering from depression or anxiety, and I it's really hard to, like, when you're already struggling to see the straight line and be consistent, to have everything fluctuating around you, it's really hard to stay away from the pits and the troughs and the peaks of everything.
Venture is such a weird job because you have to learn to not ride the roller coaster,
Yeah.
but it's almost impossible not to. And it is this weird role where you actually don't have that much control over the success of your portfolio companies. You
Yeah.
have control over what you invest in,
Sure.
and you have control over what you do as a board member. But at the end of the day, I hope we're impactful, of course, and we all do the best we can. But at the end of the day, we're not the founders. We're not the one driving these businesses. And
Yeah.
I think we can have very meaningful impact if we're good investors on these companies. But it's hard to not have real control in some moments. And
Yeah.
of course, you have a portfolio. And so at any given moment, there's always some fire, and maybe there's something really positive going on over here, but it's always a missed bag. And it can be really
Yeah.
hard to see because the feedback cycles are so long. It can
Yeah.
be really hard to know where you stand.
Sure. Sure.
What are the tools in your toolbox when it comes to mental health? Like I love baths in the gym and hiking. I guess that's what I do. What are your tools that you typically use when you're having a rough roller coaster of a day?
Those are good ones. Call a friend is probably my number one, and just tell them what's going on, get their read on the situation, or just cry, whatever it might be. But truly, like having a Rolodex of people I can call that understand and can talk through a problem really quickly is probably the number one thing. And then running, getting outside, anything that gives me perspective. And usually that's getting outside, and cooking is probably the last one, but the first two usually do the trick if I'm trying to get out of my head. And there's something about being on grass in nature that just reminds you that these problems are not that big in the grand scheme of things.
What's your favorite Bay Area hike?
Probably this is a cheesy one, but probably just Tennessee Valley. I love going over
Nice.
there in Marin, and it's so easy from my house. It's about 12 minutes to the trailhead, and that's awesome.
I think whenever it's grass and coastline, and I think whenever you can combine the two of those things,
yes.
and California has all of it, and you're winning, right?
Yeah. Oh, it's amazing.
There's
I'm with
nothing
you
like
on that.
driving along the one, man. Oh, it's just
It's so good.
magical.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, we honestly, as you mentioned, we can't really control a lot of things in life. And as board members, as investment decisions that we make, et cetera, the one thing that we can control, however, and the one thing that we must control is the Fidelity 5 question.
Oh yeah. Wait, let's
section.
have her open her last. No,
Oh my
second
God,
to
do we
last
have
gift.
how many
One
more
more-
gifts do we have, Bree?
Two
What's
more.
going
Just
on
two
right
more.
now?
I know.
This is like the fourth time that I've been like
All right,
pushing the
which
Fidelity 5
one?
questions.
Amy got a little spoiled.
Okay, well,
okay, let's
that's
see.
great.
There's two last ones. Let me
I have no
see.
idea how
The
we're going to edit
next
this, by the way, Bree.
one.
It's all
Where is it? I put it
it's
at
all
the
a
top. It should be
magic show.
the Be Present
Okay.
sticker.
Okay.
Be present. Be present.
Yeah, you guys are really spoiling me. I'm now gonna expect this on every podcast I go on.
No,
yeah,
and by the
it's
way,
gonna happen.
we know that when you say that this is the best podcast you've been on, you mean it, because we give you gifts.
Because it's been like the
Oh, this is
100% feedback.
amazing.
So we know you love reading a lot of business books, tweeting about them, giving your
Yeah.
advice. We deepen
This
your
is
Twitter.
awesome.
So I gave that to another VC, a former guest of ours, Dan, who has the library. He loved this book. He was like, this is so business gossipy, which I love. And I noticed you love business gossip books. So
Love business gossip. This is great.
Yeah.
Me
Shout out to
too.
Dan Rubin.
Oh yeah, we love Dan Rubin. But Dan
We do.
Rubin highly recommends this book. Amazing
Oh, cool.
guy. And one of his friends had worked at Bridgewater at the time, and I double checked a lot of this gossip, and it's all true.
Would you like to play Fidelity 5 Questions with Bree and I?
Do I have a choice?
No, not at all.
But we asked
That's
for
what I thought.
consent here.
Okay.
Not at
Yes, I'm in. Let's do this.
All right, excellent. Bree, do you want to kick us off?
Yes. What is your go-to karaoke song?
Journey, Strangers on a Train, or whatever that song is called. It's not by Journey. You know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, Don't Stop Believing.
Don't Stop Believing. Yeah.
Okay,
Thank you.
done.
That is like one of the best. I have a dream of singing that and getting the entire Bart or Muni to sing it with me.
Mm.
Wouldn't that be
Well,
cool?
it speaks to my soul. I'm just a small town girl, so I
Amy,
gotta.
I want you to answer this truthfully. Would you rather sing that with multiple people or you singing it solo to multiple people that have to be there and are excited about listening to you sing?
Oh, I think it'd be way more fun with somebody else because it's like
Okay.
you need two people to sing that song, I think.
Okay. For all of our listeners, Amy has a very believable face. I don't think she's telling a lie. Okay. So anyway, we move on. All right. Question number 2, Fidelity 5. Question number 2. If you could invest in any fictional startup from a movie, TV show, or book, what would it be? And just for reference, mine is Hoverboard from Back to the Future. We've had people that have said, look, if we can do the precog thing from Minority Report, that would be cool.
VR from Ready Player One.
I think mine would be Beam Me Up, Scotty from
Ooh,
Star Trek.
Yes,
Good call,
yes.
Amy.
I
Might
love
be
it.
the best answer ever.
Yes, it
It'd be
is.
so convenient. So much better.
Teleportation.
I would.
Duh.
Yeah,
That's amazing. I would not be a part of the beta testing. It would be like a Spaceballs where you'd like your ass would be forward and your neck would just be turned around.
This is a situation where my advice that done is better than perfect does not apply. It
does
just
not
needs
apply.
To be
Fair enough. Yes, I love that. All
yeah,
right,
we
Bree.
definitely want perfect on that one. Okay,
Yeah.
so this next question, we didn't really get into your time at Zora, but if you had to do it all over again, would you rather be an investor or a builder?
Look, if I could be an amazing builder and I could know that I was going to start something incredible, I'd probably be a builder. But I think
This is coming from the
better
person that
suited
says
as an
journey is
investor.
everything. Hold on, Amy. This is coming from the person who said journey is everything. Please repeat what you just said.
Okay, fair. Yes, which is a terrible thing for me to say. But look, I love being an investor and I think I'm better suited to it. But I have to say, I imagine that being a founder would be pretty fun.
Yeah.
That's such an honest answer. All of our VCs always say, "Oh, I love being an investor," but it's if you could ride something like Google or OpenAI, wouldn't you want to be a builder? It's you still get there's more glory.
I think there's probably no feeling like your customers ripping your product out of your hands, and that has got to be an incredible feeling. And I felt it as an investor, but I've never felt it as a founder. And I have to imagine there's gratification there that's very different.
I love it. I love it. All right. What movie best fits the future of the human race? Wall-E, where we've all degenerated into an obese state due to the anti-gravity in the metaverse. Avatar, where we're dominated by this quest for resources, new worlds, and walking around in avatar bodies. Or The Matrix, where we're all in a simulation.
Shout out Dax Shepard. We're obviously all in a simulation. So it has to be The Matrix.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
I'm with you on that one.
Dax, you're my idol, by the way. I wish I could be as good at interviewing. That's what we aspire to.
I love long form podcasts in general. So hence the recreation of one here. Okay, final question for Fidelity 5. What is the one deal that you passed on that you wish you hadn't?
Oh, years are
yeah, it's hard. It's hard because the arc of history is probably not like long enough to have seen the outcomes. I'm trying to think of a good one. There's definitely several. At Summit, as you can imagine, we pass on lots of stuff that we shouldn't have.
Yeah.
We passed on an early round of Canva, and
Oh.
I was not the deal partner. So it's a little, I was on the deal, but I wasn't the partner. And so it's hard
Yeah.
for me to say this was my fault that we passed on this, but I will own part of it. And that I think is the one that I think about as being like
Oof.
the biggest
Yeah.
whiff of the stuff that I've passed on in the last few years. The arc of history, I think, is just too short so far. And it's been hard to know exactly what these outcomes are going to look like. There's for sure stuff that I'm bummed that I passed on, though.
That was expertly navigated.
That
That
was.
answer.
I loved
Yeah.
that answer.
Very good.
It gave us a good logo, but it also didn't. It was like it wasn't really me, so I liked that. Prepping for this.
They're very politician.
The last part.
Yeah. So look, those were some very thoughtful and I think truthful answers to the Fidelity 5 questions, which must be met with a symbol of thanks. So with that, I think we have one box left to open.
Yes,
Hold
we
on.
do.
Please do
And
so now.
so this is exciting. We've never really officially said this, but there's two types of investors on the show, those that have started their own funds, and then those that are working for larger GPs, which is you. And that gives us more creativity for this gift, and you'll see why in a moment.
Ooh, this looks exciting.
So we always get our guest a vest because you don't want to be the only VC with a Patagonia vest, but we make sure it's bespoke with something specific to you. So you got Fearless Girl,
These are so cute.
the symbol of the fearless statue in front of Wall Street. And we picked that for you because
Oh,
yes, she's the fearless girl because you are what we think of as the fearless girl. You worked on Wall Street, you're now in venture, you left your small town in Maine. And so we want you to be able to go to all of the different VC conferences, not wearing the same Patagonia vest as everyone else, but having your own bespoke vest that represents your brand and who you are. And that is a fearless woman. So thank you
amazing
for what you are doing, by the way, for the female VC community with All Raise. And we didn't even get into a lot of the work that you're doing for the helpline that you're working with, but we're really impressed by you and so glad to have you in the VC community. So thank you for being on Drink to the VC.
Yeah, thank you guys so much. This was so fun. And you guys I love that you're showcasing a slightly different side of people. I think it's one thing to have people on and just talk about what they like to invest in, but I love the longer format of this. This was so fun. Thank you guys.
Oh, wonderful. Okay, so last but not least, Vik.
Yeah, as always, we like to have our guest kind of cheers us out. And so this is your 20 seconds to call to attention anything that you feel like is deserving of that, to say thanks to mom and dad, whatever it might be. We'd love for you, obviously, to come back, but this is your 20 seconds before we have you back on the show at a later date.
Yeah. Shout out to my family and to the Costanoa Ventures family for an awesome ride over the last 5 years there. And really shout out to you guys too for what you're showcasing here on this show. So thanks for having me.
Thank you. And cheers.
Cheers.
Have a good one.
Thanks for cozying up and listening to another episode of Drinks with a VC. We are so grateful for our listener support. Feel free to reach out and add any of your questions to the comment section. If you have an idea for a guest or have some feedback, reach out to us on LinkedIn.
If you liked that last episode, be sure to check out our others featuring VCs from Lightspeed, Bessemer, Hannah Gray, BTV, and Norwest. As always, don't forget to like and subscribe. Cheers!